Hello, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. It is Wick back with another Wicked Weekly Windup. This time we're on episode 12, and as I sort of mentioned in my previous video, I do kind of want to talk about, not necessarily that it's serious, but just even my past videos have been more silly and like lighthearted react videos, but like I wanted this to be more of a discussion style, just an analysis about Bach, as you can see by the title. So because of that, I did make another PowerPoint just because it helps me keep my notes in order. But if anyone still watches these and they ever would prefer ones where they can see me talking to the camera, feel free to let me know, because I know sometimes in these character analysis type videos, video like YouTubers will just talk to the camera, and that's more engaging because you can actually see the person rather than just a PowerPoint. But again, for me, it feels like it's easier to like lay out my argument and you're focused on this rather than on me. But anyways, that's just if that's a thing that anybody cares about. But otherwise, I would like to just kind of get right into it um, with our Let's Talk About Bach. Let's talk about Bach, baby. No, I'm just kidding. So this kind of like, I mean, everyone who's watched, if anyone's watching this video, you already know who he is, so you really didn't need this like little introductory page, but I still wanted to make it. And I did just want to say, like, Christopher Fitzgerald, the very original Bach, there's just something about his face that's so Bach-like and perfect. Like, that's not to say I don't like the new guy, because I actually also think he looks really good so far, like really promising and really Bach-like. But man, there's just something about OG Bach that is just so Bach-like. But anyways, yeah, I mean, again, too, of course, people will know that he's in the book and the musical, and of course, there's going to be differences. But just to kind of lay it out, of course, you've got stuff like, the difference in the book and musical is like he actually knew Alphabet as a child, and I really actually thought that was an interesting dynamic, and I wish they'd kept that for the musical. And another thing I noticed too is like in the book, he does get over his crush on Glinda, and even outright in his thought states that he preferred Glinda, like essentially symbolically, as she shifted away from being that kind of pretty socialite schoolgirl, his interest in her waned, which I know sounds a little bit shallow, like, oh, he was only into the rich, pretty girls, and when she kind of stopped, caring so much about the high society stuff, he's like, oh, it's all right, now we're just friends. Because again, to those who have actually read the book and not just seen the musical, you'll know that he does appear near the end of the book with a wife and several children. And yes, that wife is one of Galinda's old school buddies of the Charm Circle. Um, and I just kind of said to me, like, the reason the deeply shallow is there in like quotes and the mini bullet point is the almost like unintentional parallel and like weird Playboy Bach. Because again, we kind of see musical Fiero as the type with all the ladies, and Bach is kind of nerd, but and that's not to say that he was like a ladies' man with people throwing themselves over him, but the fact that he did marry one of Galinda's old friends is kind of funny to me. Because again, the bullet below, like that's part of the reason why I liked him in the book was he did strike me as one of the more normal members of the Charm Circle. Like he still has moments of humor, but he was meant to be more grounded and realistic, and was usually like reacting to or calling out the antics of his friends. And again, too, like he spent time with the guys and the girls. Like it wasn't just him chasing after Galinda all the time. Like in the book, they gave him other things to do. Like even beyond his friendship with Elphaba, anybody who's read the books knows about Crope and Tibbet, who were two of his friends that worked at the Shiz library with him. And he actually did have more to do with Elphaba's animal work, where I don't know explicitly how much he did for her and how much he knew, but there were a few times that she would essentially send him to fetch books for her, and so to some extent he knew she was working on animal stuff, but I don't know how much he knew. But that's what I mean though, like it's kind of funny looking back. What I noticed about the book of Wicked is that even though it's told kind of from Elphaba's perspective, so to speak, there's many times where she's not really in the book. Like in the Shiz thing, even though she's working her butt off with Dillamond studying the animal stuff, we don't really see any like intense moments of them working together in the lab late alone at night. You know what I mean? Like something bad style stuff. Instead, it's more like other characters reacting to Elphaba being a researcher, like vicariously through Bach, him kind of noticing she's always doing this, but never really knowing the details. And that was kind of interesting to me the first time I read the book, that style of perspective writing. But low key, like my kind of fantasy loving side, like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson type stuff, I'm like, man, I wish we could have seen the Charm Circle going on magical adventures through the library as they were more, active in helping Elphaba. But this is probably more realistic because I went to college, and to be fair, I mean, I never had like a close group of friends where we always did stuff together. It was more like this, where maybe people would come and go, and sometimes ask you for favors and hang out, but there was never like a grand adventure in the library. Another thing too, like what really breaks my heart about the book versus the musical is Book Bach was actually very kind and wise at the end of it. Like when Elphaba's on our full blown wicked crusade, he's like one of the last and only people to really try to talk her out of it. And not just in the please Elphaba don't do it, but like as you'll even see in a later slide, he essentially has a quote where he even says, I don't believe you're wicked, Elphaba. Like maybe everyone else calls you that, but I don't believe that. And I'm like, see, they did him so dirty in the musical. And that's part of what made me want to do this kind of like mini series of character analyses videos. And again, he basically was straight up deleted from the book canon after the first book because he literally doesn't appear in any of the other ones. And I know why. I think it's because the musical, since the musical canonized him as the Tin Man, maybe Greg Maguire didn't want to try to like touch his character again in case it confused people. Because I understand the Box arc was technically done, like he had a wife and kids, and it was implied he just spends the rest of his life as a normal Munchkin and maybe dies of old age. But man, he still could have come back in the later books. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing stopping them from having like even just visited him for a short period of time, even if he would never become like a main character again. So I am a little bit bummed that Bach literally only exists in book one. And the musical, of course, as you could see as a pun, I had to put Bach like the musician, because in my family, we will sometimes joke about that. Like, if I'm talking about book Bach, I mean B-O-Q. But if I mean musical Bach, I'll jokingly spell it like the famous composer. And of course, again, like, the reason this slide's so short is y'all know this guy. He was a Galinda simp, but like, ways that I've made him more interesting to myself is if you see him as, like, a people pleaser, like, he really wants to get in good with Galinda, not just because she's hot, but because the idea that he may have this, like, personality, like, this maybe not weak but insecure personality where even though we only see it with Galinda, that it's one interpretation that could explain like not just the dynamic of their relationship and the way he kind of clings to her, but even his relationship with Nessa, because even though he didn't like her, he still stayed with her for years. And granted, part of it's implied that she wouldn't have let him leave even if he tried. Like, essentially, he's getting a taste of his own medicine. Like, he might have been the same way with Galinda if Nessa hadn't come and snatched him up. Not saying that either of them were right or wrong. Um, but for whatever reason, whether it was physical coercion or mental, emotional, and verbal coercion, because it probably was the latter in the beginning, and then I imagine Anessa became more physical over time. But to be honest, he literally was a victim of domestic abuse for years, and it's kind of something I feel like nobody really talks about. Sure, maybe Nessa wasn't hitting him, but she did basically make him a slave and never let him leave. Like, that is, I'm sorry, you guys, but that is abusive behavior. Like, abuse isn't just, I punched you in the face. It could also be, I won't let you leave. I won't let you see anybody else. I've cut you off from everybody. You literally can, or are dependent solely on me. You have no one else. And of course, that warps his psyche. So to me, that explains why this Bach did become so twisted, whereas the other book Bach kind of just to some, you may say he fizzled out. He didn't do anything glorious with his life the way Elphaba and Glinda do. But to me, there's nothing wrong with quote unquote fizzling out and just settling down. Like, if anything, I think it's a good contrast to the others. And the irony, too, is he. Because Glinda technically lives too, but he's implied to live to like the oldest, most peaceful age. Because, you know, Elphaba and Fiyero died, and Glinda angst over Elphaba for years, whereas Bach is implied to actually, in a weird way, have figured it out because he chose the peaceful route. Um, but of course, the musical itself didn't have time to really go into all that, so his screen time was very reduced and his plot relevance was reduced. Like, literally, he really only feels like he exists there to be the Tin Man, and because they were like whoever was reading the book to make it into a musical was like, oh my god, look, a love triangle. Okay, we got to keep that. We're not going to keep the part about him being friends with Elphaba or him helping her out in the library. No. We're just going to keep the crush on Galinda, even though that also never went anywhere. Because again, even in Act One of the book, he does fall out of love with her. But in the musical, it's implied he literally loves her all his life. Which, I mean, it's fine. Sometimes people do, but I'm just like, man, you did him dirty! You made him almost like, you know, one of the incel types that, like, complains about how he never can get a woman because all women are, you know, crazy. Um, so again, the nuance of his character didn't really have time to shine through, and his personality was reduced because he went from being the dork simp in Act 1 to the vengeful jerk in Act 2. That's literally it. Like, he didn't even get an arc where he, like, maybe realizes that he's wrong or has a moment of conflict. He's just like, no, I'm killing Elphaba, and that's that. Because to be fair, again, that could play into the years of domestic violence by that time. Like, Nessa had psychologically broken him down so much, he literally was just, like, mentally gone. There was no more goodness in him. And that in of itself could be a good parallel to the entire plot of Wicked. You know, are people born wicked, or do they have wickedness thrust upon them? Was Bach always a little bit of a creepy pervert that would have always become this and fallen into an unhealthy relationship? Or did the circumstantial, you know, events slowly mold him into a monster? But that's what I mean. They didn't have time to address that in the musical. So even though you can still draw a nuance from musical Bach, it's not like this showed up in the musical, really. At least in my opinion. But yeah, to move on to the next slide, I mean, this is kind of just a recap of everything I just said and how they did him dirty. Like they turned him into a simp, but removed the nuance of having him having other personality traits outside of Galinda simping. And again, even that development when he finally makes peace with the fact that he's no longer into her, that literally never happened. And again, he doesn't learn how to respect boundaries. And to me, the pity date was not necessarily the big thing that I disliked, because I mean, especially since Galinda did kind of like strong arm him into it. But it's still, to me, it's something that's kind of like, you shouldn't pity date people because it's always going to bite you and them in the butt. I do think it's like a good dynamic that these three have. Like I feel like it fits the way they were written for the play. To have, Galinda being unhealthy towards Bach, like go date her, and Bach being like, okay, and then Nessa being like, okay, and then both of them like ultimately not being right for each other. But again, I'm thinking of Book Bach, and I'm like, no. Because even if it would be cool to see Book Bach with Nessa and or Elphaba, I'm like, yeah, I didn't want to see it like this. That's what I'm saying too. Again, he became cruel near the end and literally had no redeeming arcs or anything like that. And yeah. So that's what I said. Again, bottom bullet. I feel like his dynamic with Galinda and to a lesser extent Nessa is realistic in terms of how toxicity like that can brew over time if it's not properly addressed. It's just like there is realism in it. It just the musical didn't have time to like go into all that because it is ultimately Elphaba and Galinda's story. But what I'd like to see out of the movie is just more Bach. Like I said, everything I've said before, just maybe seeing him with Elphaba more, not just Galinda simping, seeing him with the other characters and giving him like actually something to do. So again, like maybe somebody who's a little bit politer and learns how to respect boundaries and just more a mix of the book and the musical and more than we got. I don't know if they'll have time to give him anything more, but I hope so, since we know that this movie's going to be like what, an hour and a half to 2 hours long, and it's only Act One, so it's not like they don't have time this time around. So again, like, and what I mean by the psyche and relationship to men and women, it's sort of that mix of like how his mindset's evolved and how again he wasn't just a Galinda simp in the book, like he hung out with the guys. It wasn't just him chasing after women. And of course, again, another thing I'd like to see is maybe possibly a redemption arc in the Act Two sequel we're gonna get in 2025. Like either, and I don't necessarily mean that he needs to redeem and repent, but just it would be nice to see some more struggle with like hurting Elphaba or something. Uh, and even like I said, the bullet with the star, the wish he could have been in the later books to just so I could see the fatherly advice he would have given to the other characters, because kind of like what he gave to Elphaba, like I could see him helping Lear and Rain too if he appeared. And maybe more foreshadowing and symbolism with the heartlessness. Because admittedly, to be fair, again, if we go back to the musical interpretation of Bach that was rather tone deaf with boundaries, it's not like disrespecting boundaries itself a sign of like heartlessness, but it can lead to it. Because if you continually refuse to respect people's boundaries because you don't see them as important, again, that in of itself is not heartless, but it can lead to heartlessness through the generation of selfishness. And this is just kind of a continuation slide. So again, more backstory, box story of him and Elphaba, being friends as kids, and this was something like it's copium, I admit, but I literally have a headcanon that in March of the Winch Hunters, by then Bach actually was back on Elphaba's side because Fiyero had time to talk to him and Burr about it, and he was, and I had the idea that Scarecrow's able to be like, Burr, I know you probably don't even really remember her, but she saved you from class, and I was there that day. And then he would say to Bob, be like, listen, I know that horrible stuff happened with the sister and you're a tin man now, so clearly something awful happened there too, but like, listen to me, man, you would have died if she hadn't done that. Like, she didn't mean to mess up the spell. It was Nessa that messed up the spell anyways. And just the idea that Fiyero, since it's not like he forgot who Elphaba was, that he could maybe help convince Burr and Bach to also join him in pretending to kill Elphaba, and maybe even like in my wildest dreams, the Scarecrow's able to talk to Dorothy about it because Dorothy is a very kind girl. Like I feel like if they explained it to her, because even in the book, she does try to help Elphaba a little bit. Like she doesn't want to kill Elphaba either, so I like the idea that anywhere from 3 to 4 of them could have secretly been working to save Elphaba's life, just because I hate seeing Bach turn into a mindless killer, especially since the whole musical and the book is about the dynamic of good and evil and how nobody is truly one or the other. Also, in the next one, I just like Bach because he reminds me of me. He's cuter than I am, but he reminds me of me. Oh, and again, the charm circle thing I mentioned, like just watching the. Again, he could be a pretty good character study of how domestic violence impacts people over the years. And again, even the foil of his book self, who ironically enough became the only one with a sort of happy ever after. Because granted, he and Mila, it sounds like Mila didn't really like her life with him either, just because it was a status downgrade for her. But I don't necessarily know if she didn't like him. You know what I mean? Because admittedly, it could have been like an arranged marriage type thing, but it does fascinate me that why would Milla marry down, essentially. So that's why I didn't know if there was any choice to it, but sometimes it sounds like there wasn't. So that could be another interesting thing too, is that Bach seems blissfully happy with domestic life, whereas his wife is secretly like, I hate it here. So, and then these are just a couple of quotes I liked from both the play and the book. There was literally only three. Unfortunately, I couldn't find too many that I liked without having to like reread the entire book. But I just loved the lemons, melons, and pears. Oh my joke from the musical. And then this one, the quote that I found was from page 89 of an online PDF of Wicked, and this is the quote that has the line where it even says, he loved the girl who loved the glamour and herself, and that girl seemed to have disappeared. He was happy to have Glinda as his friend. He had Glinda as his friend. He loved Galinda, but this was now Glinda, someone he could no longer quite figure out. Case closed. So that's what I mean. Like, even if it seems a little shallow that he only liked Galinda and not Glinda, but I like this. Like, I don't know. I just thought it was a really good quote and a really good moment for him, and I kind of wish that it had been the musical, also just so we could like stop with him being creepy. And this is the one I was talking about where he actually is kind to Elphaba, like. And I do apologize for the formatting in hindsight. I just copied and pasted the quote over instead of separating the lines of dialogue. But you can find it for yourself on page 214 of that online PDF. You just Google Wicked free book. Because, I mean, I own the physical copy. You've seen it. It's just easier to copy and paste from the internet than to essentially transcribe from the book. But this is what I mean. Like, Bach is really wise in this moment. And I'm like, we need this in the musical. That's all I'm going to say. But that is enough of me rambling about Bach. And if anybody enjoyed this, feel free to let me know what you did or didn't like about it. And if you have a particular character you wanted to see next, feel free to let me know. Because I'm going to do like the main 4 or 5, but it's just a question of like in what order. And again, if anyone would prefer a video style where I talk to the camera instead of you seeing a PowerPoint, feel free to let me know too. I'm always open for suggestions on how to make this more enjoyable and more engaging for people to converse with. And I hope maybe if anyone's got feedback on the characters, I'd just love to hear your opinions on them. But that is actually it for this Wicked Weekly Windup. It was just going to be a little Bach analysis. I think next week I am either going to do another character analysis, or I think I've got one fanfic that I like recorded but never posted. I have to double check that. But I guess you guys will know in 7 days. I'll see you all next week.